The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, we had another edition of All My Canucks planned, but we've been preempted by the Connor McDavid suspension heard around the world. We brought this up earlier this week. It happened over the weekend. You may have seen it by now. Connor McDavid suspended 3 games for cross-checking Connor Garland in the head. And honestly, I kind of thought it was going to get left at that. But we've heard reactions from other NHL players around the world, including Sidney Crosby and Alexander Ovechkin. It's even gotten to a point where Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans made reference to it after he was fined for allegedly saying something, which apparently was not true. But anyway, the Edmonton Oilers released a statement, which doesn't typically happen when a player gets suspended, especially if they're not planning on appealing that suspension. And of course, members of the Canucks have spoken about it, but of course, Connor McDavid getting to speak about that on Wednesday. The fact that we've reached this point, we should start there, yes.
I'm just going to say, give the Oilers credit. This is an inside baseball observation for me, but as a media member, so many teams do this game where the person doesn't speak until their suspension's over, which drags the story on it. In this case, it would have been another 6-7 days. Credit to Connor McDavid for just coming out and getting this over with and having that discussion with the reporters at Edmonton, which again, inside baseball, probably most fans or listeners of this podcast don't really give a shit, but it is a small thing that I do want a hat tip to the Oilers.
Okay. That's a good way of looking at it. You're right. Maybe we wouldn't have. That's actually a really good way of looking at it. But still, just the fact that it has turned into a discussion point where people are making jokes about the Oilers and the statement that they put out. People are wondering if Connor McDavid's a whiner for even saying anything or just letting it get to this point, or just I'm very curious about how this story has snowballed from what he did was wrong to people wondering if this was too much or if we don't need to be speaking about it as much or any other direction that the story has taken.
Well, look, I know some people are tired of hearing about this, but I think because we haven't addressed it, we should talk about the decision itself. And, while by the letter of the law, 3 games, I think is justifiable. Connor was suspended back in 2019 for a head check. That was a 2-game suspension. If you look in the CBA, it does say, basically subsequent penalties, if you've been suspended, will be more severe. So based on that justification, the fact there's another head-related shot being made here, I think they could justify 3 games, but I also, at the same time, I think it's a little heavy-handed. And so, that's just my view from where I sit. I just feel like, what is the point of supplemental discipline? Fundamentally, you're trying to keep the game as safe as it can be. You're trying to discourage others from going down a similar path, right? You're making it punitive when players lose their cool or cross the line or do something dangerous, which of course this was that. But on the flip side of it here, Connor Garland wasn't hurt. Mm-hmm. Evan Bouchard, who took a pretty vicious cross check from Tyler Myers, who also got 3 games from the Canucks, he wasn't hurt. You're taking the best player in the world out of the Oilers lineup on a homestand, again, where people have paid for tickets. And I just feel like it's probably 1 game too many. I mean, the next, so he's already sat game 1 of the suspension. They played Washington on Tuesday. The Canucks are in Edmonton on Thursday. And so I think given that probably made sense, you wouldn't want, 2 games made sense. You're keeping him out of the Vancouver game, which I think it's the rare time, actually, the punishment, the team that a foul is committed against, the team gets a benefit, right? In this case, they don't have to face Connor McDavid on Thursday, which is a benefit, right? Because often when someone gets suspended, even if it's a 5 or 8 game suspension, it doesn't come around that you're playing that team again. So it doesn't necessarily do anything for the team that's had a foul committed. So 2 just made sense to me. And I realized, okay, so what are we spilling all this ink and airtime over 1 game? Well, 1 game's important. I think what's important here too is Connor McDavid is important to this league, not just for who he is on the ice. This guy has actually gone above and beyond to put his best foot forward for the NHL. He was, we talked a lot about it. He was front and center in that Amazon series that they did last year in the playoffs. he helped revamp the All-Star skills competition last year in Toronto and participated in the event and gave it his all and actually won it, but, and I think there's a number of other things we could point to over time. So, I just think that it feels like they're maybe making a little bit of an example of him in this case. And so I can understand why he and those close to him and the Oilers are upset. And so I think that's one part of this. But then, the conversation has spun, Julian, in 1,000 directions. Like, do Stars get enough, calls in this league and other things, which, I'm here for those discussions. I don't really know where to take them. I mean, you look at the numbers. Natural Stat Trick is one of the sites that keeps this. If you look by, basically if you sort per hour of ice time for Connor McDavid, he's receiving the fewest penalties against of any of his seasons in the NHL this season. So, that's just a little thing in isolation. Maybe that led to some of the frustration, not just from what Connor Garland was doing in that moment, but maybe there's an accumulation of frustration there. It's hard for me to know. Anyway, you're right. This thing has been chopped up and diced in every direction. You got the NFL players weighing in. But this is what it should be. If the face of the league gets suspended, there should be hot takes and too many hours of this discussion. Because if not, then what are we even doing here? It means no one cares.
That's true. I'm of the school of thought that two things can be true. You brought those points up where, hey, fine, Connor McDavid, maybe there should be more penalties called against those who try to do infractions upon him. I could understand that. He even said as much himself on Wednesday, just quote, I think players across the league, not just me, not just guys in the room, just want to see the game called in parentheses consistently. A penalty in the first is a penalty in the third. A penalty in October is a penalty in April. That is an ongoing complaint that people have about the league. I can understand that discussion. I also don't have a problem with Connor McDavid getting 3 games. He cross-checked a man in the head. I can understand him being frustrated by Connor Garland holding him down onto the ice, especially in a crucial moment in that game.
Can you tell how hard he got hit, though, and where he took the brunt of that?
He hit him in the head. What? Looked pretty bad. Look,
but other cross-checks have been given 1 or 2 games. Timo Meier got a 1-game suspension for a cross-check to the head this year.
Yes.
So why is this 3? Austin Matthews a few seasons before, right? And he's a similar type of player. 2 games for a cross-check directly to a guy's side of his neck, head area.
Yeah.
With force. I don't think it was on purpose in that case. I think the stick rode up on him when they were engaging. But still, the point so that was 2 games. One has been 1 game.
If you want it down to 2,
this is what I'm saying. I'm with you. No one is arguing no suspension, or no one is saying that.
For sure. No one's saying that. For me, it's just if you want to get to a point where it's 2 games, all right, fine. It's just an offense was committed by Connor McDavid, best player in the world or not, he is, and he got punished for it.
But he's played 700 games in the league.
Okay, but he committed an offense.
Right.
What do you want to do?
I'm saying, why is he getting the high end of what that can be for suspension? I don't get it. 700 games. No, this guy has this is one thing he brought up in a scrum today. I don't know if you heard it, but he did say, he mentioned on the call that they reference history, and you've got a history. It's okay, what is his history? 1 bad hit and
1 bad suspension. Yeah,
but it was 6 years ago.
It's a suspension. Isn't that what they do?
6 years.
Does that get thrown out?
It doesn't get thrown out, but my point is, I don't think anyone can put their hand on whatever they believe in and swear to whatever God they believe in and say, you think Connor McDavid's a dirty player?
I'm not saying he's a dirty player, but he committed an offense.
Yes, but here's the thing. We agree with that. There's a range of potential punishments for that offense. We've seen this year a 1-game suspension for a cross-check to the face. Now we've seen a 3-game suspension. There's been a 2-game suspension within recent memory with a similar star player. So based on history, it can be 1, 2, or 3. That's established. Why is he getting 3 is my argument. That's it. It's not, I'm not saying at all he should be suspended, but to me, it's just weird that he got the top end of that range when, anyway.
Yeah. When cause there's a world where what do we say if he gets
I'm doing what I promised I wouldn't do. I was I'm not going to get fired up about this, but I'm getting a little fired up.
But I think that's fine to get fired up about it. And as we're talking right now, I am looking back at the at what he did, and I'm trying to think, like, you know what, do you have a point here? But I'm also wondering now, if you give him one game for that suspension, then all of a sudden, you know who's going to complain? The people who were mad about Austin Matthews getting 2 for that.
Fair. And the Canucks, because again, had he got 1 game, he would be eligible to re-enter the lineup Thursday when they play Vancouver. I think that's why I think, for a lot of reasons, I think 2 games was the perfect number. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, if we asked the people that made this decision and they were being honest, they would point to that exact part of the CBA that basically says penalties get more severe over time, the more suspensions. But I just think, listen, there's so much room for interpretation in what they do. I mean, 1 bad head hit 6 years ago.
I mean, fine. Like, if you feel that's like so far back that like it shouldn't, like, we should just be whatever.
Again,
but
I
like,
operate from the position
history.
we shouldn't look for a reason to take the best player in the world off the ice. Like, we should be looking for a reason almost to find him, to see it in the most favorable conditions possible. This is a business.
Sure, but like, then you're kind of asking to put the rules to be a little bit different for him versus everybody else, which,
well, they are.
I can understand. Which
Timo
I think
Meier
for some
got
degree,
1
yes,
game
but like,
for cross-checking guy in the head. So there's clearly different rules.
Austin Matthews got 2.
And different interpretations.
It's just, I don't know. Like, if it's bad, call it for what it is. Like, if we start getting to a point where we start giving special treatment for stars on those situations, that gets into a whole lot of trouble. You
can't obviously have guys going after each other's heads, but when it's happened in the past, guys have got 1 and 2 game suspensions. That's all I'm getting at. I just think a 2-game penalty. If they had said 2 games on Monday night when this came out, I don't think there'd be any uproar. I think Connor and the Oilers would have taken it fine. I think even Canucks fans, whatever. And you could have called it a wash. I would be fine even with Tyler Myers getting 2 games. This is what I'm saying. Like, I'm not. And I just feels like the 3rd game was excessive, and it triggered something here. It triggered something deeper than just the act. Then I think it's more like, what are we doing? Like, it feels like when there's players that are a lot more thuggish in this league and things happen and they don't get any suspension. They don't get any, like, it's like the league is looking for reasons not to suspend certain other players that have consistently on the line or across the line with the way they deliver checks. And there's a few around the league that instances over time. And you might remember some, Julian, where you're like, what is going on? And then look at, again, I'm not defending the action here, but it really does feel like they went as far as they could with this one. And I'm confused by that because, as I say, I think you should be not willingly taking your best players out of the game.
This speaks to something I've said on different platforms. Sometimes the way the Department of Player Safety doles out punishment is like a bunch of guys going to the back room, spinning a wheel of justice, and wherever the arrow points to, that's how they determine what their suspension should be. And maybe this is probably an example of that joke, clearly a joke, that I'm saying with regards to doling out punishment. You're right, to a point. I think if it was just 2 games, we don't talk about this in this same way, but I also just don't think that 3 games beyond that is like the worst thing. Like, that's something that should be the case for hitting someone in the head. And maybe that should extend to so many other situations too. Like, it was I think it was pretty malicious. Like, I understand frustration in that moment, but he should not be doing that. And Connor McDavid acknowledged it. Connor McDavid acknowledged as such that he should not have been doing that. He also said, I'm
going to remember this. The next time we're into some suspension thing, I'm going to remember that you are always like, let's take guys out of the game for even more games.
It's just, like, whether you're the best player in the world or you're not the best player in the world, like, we should have something consistent.
That's unrealistic, though.
But then it's just going to cause that problem. So if the roles were reversed,
does the NFL do that with Patrick
if the roles
Mahomes?
were reversed and Connor Garland got 3 games for that's fine.
Yes.
No, that's not how that should go. That's not how that should go. Or sorry, sorry.
But I mean, it's unrealistic to say every player is the same.
Fine. But like, if Connor McDavid gets 2, like, it should have been 2. Like, I don't know. Sorry, you know what? No, let me reassess that. You think if Connor Garland gets 3 games for the roles being reversed here, that is fine, and Connor McDavid should only be getting 2 of that, purely off the fact that the NHL needs to do everything they can to ensure that the best player in the world is on the ice.
Yes, it's a business. And
I understand it's a business, but like that
no, but
also
there's different
contributes
treatment
to
in lots of different ways.
I get
everywhere.
that too, but that ultimately contributes
the same way Matt Rempe should get excessive penalties when he does something dumb because he's a player that does dumb. No, but
he has a history.
I mean,
Matt Rempe has a history, and he's on the ice for essentially just being this goon who makes these dangerous hits.
Right,
Matt
but
Rempe
I'm
should
saying
definitely
I
get
view
punished for
his
that.
actions differently than versus when Connor McDavid crosses the line.
I think it's too. Man, we're really fired up about this.
I know. And I was like, everyone is already so tired of this subject and everyone else is doing the same. No, I know, but like.
You actually not even to be sorry about. Like, this is a fun discussion. We didn't say anything bad about each other. It's just.
No,
like,
it's just one.
My whole thing is just, I think there needs to, like, any opportunity for the league to have some kind of consistency with this process. They need to get to that. And look, in this case, there isn't, considering the fact that Connor got what he got and Austin has gotten what he's gotten at Timo Meier and so on and so forth. There needs to be that. That is an issue at the forefront. What I don't agree with.
No, because your reputation matters. Connor McDavid has played 700 NHL games. You know what he is as suspended. You know what he is as a player. There is like a well-documented history of him not doing this. Yes. Like, I don't feel like you need to go to the extreme end of the potential punishments to send him a particular message. Like that, he doesn't need the message. You know, when someone like Matt Rempe's played 40 games and he's already been suspended twice, you're like, we have to go to the extreme end because this guy probably isn't going to get it. And he's way more likely to repeat as an offender. So I don't know. I think who you are does matter, and it's not. And I don't just mean about your paycheck or how many goals you've scored. I mean it's your resume. It's a proven track record of what you're likely to do on the ice. And so anyway, I mean, I've lost the cause.
Gave Connor McDavid 5 or 10.
I mean, good thing. We'd be talking about it on Monday too. That
are you kidding
if it was longer,
it would have been a much different.
At least we could put this to bed now because I mean, Connor's living with it. The Oilers are living with it. Would have been interesting if he had appealed this. I mean, Gary Bettman almost never, ever reduces suspensions, but you know, it's not often that maybe the face of the league at this point comes in arguing. I think there's an argument to take this down to 2, and I just wonder if the commissioner would have done it. But alas, we'll never know.
I guess we'll never know.
We definitely will never know.
No, we won't.
This is everyone's moving on now. Like this was the last of it. Connor McDavid addressed it. The Oilers put out their statement. You know, the appeal window is closed. Now he just serves the games. He's back next Monday against Seattle. Get your tickets.
Yes.
At Rogers Place.
Absolutely. And the two guys from the Chris Johnston show spoke their piece about this whole thing. Whatever.
I am just more confused now than ever about what the what goes on there. So look, I'm with you too. I guess just maybe I'm a little bit more relaxed about, not relaxed, I should say, like just it's a little, it doesn't bother me as much with the games. You make very valid arguments. It doesn't bother me as much. If there was a really bad outcome here, then I would say, of course, you go to the farther end of the punishment scale.
I don't think 3 is that much farther of an extreme scale.
It's $65,000.
It's not our money. That's fair.
And it's a short. Yeah, it's not our money. That's for sure.
It's not our money. Look, if I lost $65,000, I'd be mad.
We're gonna have to order another run of these McDonald's commercials to get Connor made whole on this whole deal.
I'd call McDonald's tomorrow. It'd be like, Austin, what are you doing? We need to get these done now. I got 3 games off.
He's probably making $650,000 for that, not 65. So,
boy, I hope that offsets some of that money.
Exactly.
I hope that offsets some of that money. Okay. Unless there's anything else we want to add on Connor versus Connor.
Let's call a merciful end to this one. We'll call it truce.
Truce. Still a fun discussion though. You and Jonas Siegel at The Athletic put together a list of potential center fits for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm not going to spoil the whole list here, but there are a couple names on that list that have been pretty intriguing. And I don't think this will be the last we talk about them as opposed to with regards to them being linked to the Leafs. Ryan O'Reilly, Brock Nelson, and Yanni Gord. How likely is it that one of those 3 end up on the Toronto Maple Leafs by trade deadline? Or is there someone else on that list who you think might have a higher chance of being there?
You know, the truth is it's tough to say this far out from March 7th, and we have these discussions around a lot of teams, buyers, sellers, obviously the trade board. Another one is coming out soon, by the way. Just putting some finishing touches on it. It's hard to say exactly what's going to happen until the other end of the Four Nations tournament. I mean, we're going to have basically 2 weeks of transaction avalanche, I think, which is not a reference to the Colorado Avalanche, but I just think there's going to be an avalanche of moves after the Four Nations event before March 7th. And so, we're going to have to frame it up, but based on the centers that we believe that could be available or that we know are available, Jonas and I did this list, and quite honestly, Jonas ranked the 1 through 10. My job in the column, if you saw it, I basically gave any sort of insiderish background I could on each player, whether say I know what the team might be asking for that player, what the circumstances might be, and Jonas, who covers the Leafs for The Athletic on a daily basis, put together in this order. But I have to I don't really dispute, obviously, the order he came up with here, because the Leafs, what do they need? And remember, every center available obviously brings some different skill sets, but they're looking for a third line center. I think that they can maybe get a bit of offense out of. And so some of the names on this list are more, I guess, able to bring that element than others. And so that's kind of was the exercise. O'Reilly is an interesting one. He's the top of the list, just because of the familiarity. He played for Toronto for part of a season in 2023 when they beat the Lightning in the first round. He's played for Craig Berube and won a Stanley Cup. He's currently in Nashville with 2 years left on his deal, but the Predators are having a tough year. People like a comeback story. So I can see certainly a hockey case for him being a Leaf, but I can't sit here today, quite honestly, and say who's most likely or not. It's just a little too far out to know. I mean, there's 2 Bruins in the top 5 there. I don't even know if the Bruins are going to sell or not. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that they're considering the possibility of it, but that doesn't mean they're going to walk down that road.
One name I really like to see on this list, just because I've seen fans ask about it for months on end, is Nazem Kadri, which, speaking of reunions, I mean, I think a lot of Leafs fans are kind of trying to manifest that into existence. But also the Flames right now, they're fighting for a playoff spot. I don't even know if there's any appetite for them to want to move on from that type of player ahead of the deadline.
My sense is they have zero appetite right now to move on from Kadri in Calgary. So
that makes sense.
There's a reason he's number 9 on this list and not closer to the top, because I do think from a fit standpoint, if again in a world where the Flames were trading him, I do think that he would make a whole lot of sense for the Leafs. Very familiar with the city. He's proven he can perform here too, which I do think matters. This isn't everyone's cup of tea, the fishbowl that can be being a Leaf. I think he, at this stage of his career, would fit in nicely, potentially even on a second line at times, but certainly as their third line center. The big issue is the one you highlight there. I just think the Flames, they're not looking, they traded a lot of players away last year when you were still on the beat. A lot of those players weren't re-signing, right? They were pending UFAs for the most part. They were players those were sort of necessary decisions, but there's never been a desire that I've felt from the Flames to completely strip it down or go through one of these true massive rebuilds. And so I think Kadri's, I know he's an important part of their team. He's first line center, top power play guy, second on the team in scoring behind Huberdeau, and they're in a playoff race. So I don't see that at this point in time. But if anything changes, if there's a shift in the organization and they would make him available, I do think I'd have him a lot higher than 9th on the list in terms of, how much the Leafs should be enthused about making that happen. But for anyone out there who's clinging to hope with this, they got an old 43 sweater somewhere in the back of their closet. I don't think you're going to need it, at least before this deadline. We'll have to see, if things shift in the offseason or perhaps in future years, because Kadri's still got 3 more years on his contract after this one.
You can check out the rest of CJ and Jonas's list at The Athletic. What I'll do is, since this is late January that we're talking about this, we could always revisit this in about a month or so.
Oh, for sure.
Closer to the deadline. We'll have a much better sense on that. You mentioned the Flames, though. I'm just curious, because even though I don't cover the team anymore, I'm still very, I pay attention to what's going on with the team.
Yeah.
The fact that they're competing for a playoff spot, the fact that fans have been asking for this team to kind of bottom out so they can get a higher chance of getting top level talent in the draft. And that doesn't look like what's going to happen this year. In fact, there's a world where they finish in a spot where they end up with no first round pick this year because of that Sean Monahan trade and the conditions of that trade, which I would have to Google for 5 minutes and pause the show to revisit. But there is a world where that could exist. I'm curious what you think about where they're at right now and how they're going about their not rebuild. Because at this point, more than ever, it is not a rebuild.
I like it. I've come around over now having watched the league evolve for, 20 years in a cap world. And, if you go back to 04-05 when the cap came around, that's a profound shift in the business of running a professional hockey team in the NHL. And, I don't think initially everyone understood the ramifications of it. Obviously, different trends emerged in terms of the way players sign contracts, this and this and that. Anyway, fast forward 20 years, and we've seen a couple cycles now of teams' developments, their ups, their downs, the decisions they make. And more than ever, even though I do acknowledge that every team wants a true difference-making number one overall type of pick, I just don't think the numbers are stacked in your favor. I mean, the draft lottery itself isn't stacked in your favor, even if you finish dead last. And, a team like the Chicago Blackhawks, which has gone down to the bottom of the league, did hit, got the right lottery balls and got Connor Bedard. I mean, to me, they're still a long way away. And so I think there's real danger in how you do it. Really easy sitting here again in my podcast studio with the benefit of hindsight, never having had the pressure of making decisions for an organization. But for the life of me, I don't get why Chicago traded away Hagel and DeBrincat in particular. Like, to me, when you bring someone like Bedard in or Nazar or these other players that they've drafted, you want to have the sort of the level of player 23 to 27, call it. I mean, those tend to be the players roughly that drive the engine of your team. Now, there are some exceptions. There's the occasional player under 23 that can do it, and there's the occasional Sidney Crosby out there that can do it way above 27. But in general, the guts of your team have to be in a certain window to be pushing your group forward. And, it hasn't worked. They've signed all these free agents who are much older than 27, and those guys just aren't at a stage of their career where they can make a big enough difference. Like, I think individually they could make a difference in the right situation, but not for what Chicago needs. And then there's this huge gap. Anyway, that's a long way of saying if you're in Calgary, I just think that there's warning lights about going the other direction, like tearing it down. And, even Detroit, like they held on for years, to be fair. I think they made the playoffs, 25, 26 years in a row. And by the end, their fans wanted a rebuild. Well, guess what? They're not enjoying it so much after year 7 or 8. And, let's see what the Red Wings can do. I mean, maybe they can find a way among this cluster of teams to get in the playoffs this year. But if not, I mean, it's just such a long road. So I sort of applaud the Flames for not. In some ways, I think the easiest thing you can say is we're tearing it down and trade everyone away. I mean, like the trading everyone away part is easy. Building it back up, not so much. And you need some luck and all those things. So, well, I admit that they're a little bit caught between. I still think they're a competitive team. They're bringing young players along. You have Dustin Wolf, who's, obviously been part of the Calder Trophy conversation that we had. I think there's other ways you augment it. And then maybe at a certain time you are trading the odd player away from this and you just gotta renew a little bit. But, personally, I like that they're not going the cynical direction. And quite honestly, it's paid off. They're playing meaningful games right now versus being at the very bottom of the league, hoping for the right ping pong balls to fall into place.
So what do you think about the fact that a guy like Rasmus Andersson, who maybe could be someone worth trading for the Flames, it seems like they don't want to move on from him at all? Like, I am very curious at the fact that they want to hold on to that asset, but I think that more or less speaks to what you're saying about the fact that if they want to be competitive and play more meaningful games, you need that type of player on your roster.
Right. And the guy wants to be there, at least if you believe his words.
Yep.
I've read a few interviews with him where he's been pretty clear that he doesn't want to be traded. To me, that suggests there's a world you're extending him when his contract allows you to do that. Maybe he is the next captain of the team, once Michael Backlund is moved on. I mean, I think some of that continuity is healthy and you got to do it with the right players, but Anderson, for sure, it could be a big trade asset for them. I mean, he still could be. Next year's the final year of his deal, right?
Yeah.
So, if next year he's a pending UFA and it's now all of a sudden we're in January 2026 and it doesn't look like he wants to sign an extension, when he's had a chance to, it's not going to work. I mean, he's still a massive trade asset at next year's deadline. I mean, I think, he'd be right near the top of the trade board, most likely. So, I think it's totally fine for them to hang on to him. As I say, if you had asked me this question, it wouldn't have been about the Flames at that time, but 4 or 5 years ago, I probably would have given you a different answer. I would have been like, man, you got to either be about to win or you got to be like last. I see it a little bit. I mean, first of all, the league has changed the rules a couple times too. Like they've made it harder to win the number 1 overall pick from the final spot in the standings. So they've tried to disincentivize tanking that way. And, you can fall down to 3rd or 4th. I don't know. A lot of these players, like I'm looking the New York Rangers, right? They traded Capo Caco, recent number 2 overall pick. Not saying they're going to move Alexis Lafreniere, but his name's in trade rumors that have been going on. Like it just, it's tough to build teams in the league, but I think it's dangerous letting go of a competitive group, and Calgary refuses to do that. And I applaud Craig Conroy for his conviction in it.
For this team, I don't know how they're going to do it. They need to find a way to get top level talent. Because I think the way that they've gone about assembling some of those young players, guys like Dustin Wolf, Matthew Coronado looks like he's doing okay over there too. Before he got injured, Connor Zary looked like he was doing all right too. I think it's fine to have those good young players and have them around some good veterans. They're just missing a star. They're missing maybe 2 stars. And you either trade or sign them through free agency or you draft them. And if you're in a position where you're not going to be to get a top 3
who's never drafted
pick,
a top level talent?
Tell me.
Ever. Vegas Golden Knights.
Okay.
That's true. Who knows?
But it's true. You're right.
A player they've drafted and traded might become a top level talent, but they don't have their own, and they're on the extreme end of things have gone well, and they've made a lot. Yeah. They're a well-run front office, and they've made bold moves, and a lot of them have paid off.
They traded for that talent, though. They traded for. Well,
they got Jack Eichel,
number 2 overall pick. They traded
Alex.
For.
I mean, forget Pietrangelo, not because he's not a great player, but he was signed as a free agent. But they got Eichel in a trade and Stone in a trade, like just off the top of my head.
Insane.
I mean, that's pretty good.
That's really good. But ultimately, whether you're drafting for them or not, you have to go out and get that star talent. If you're Craig Conroy and you've decided, all right, well, we're not going to tank for it, you got to use your whatever salary cap space you have, the draft capital you've assembled, because they have both of those. Go get a star, whether it's this offseason, the offseason to come after that. You need a star on this team in order for all of this to be worthwhile. If you add a star at the top of that lineup, we look at this Flames team very differently, especially if Dustin Wolf holds up as your number 1 guy. And I think he's been the number 1 guy over the last few games because they're starting to give him more starts. But you have the team you have there. You add a star or 2 on that team. You look at this team very differently. I get wanting the draft. And look, if you could put yourself in a position where you can get a high draft pick who can eventually become a star for you, and you could lock them up for how many years or whatever.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't need to be a high pick.
Nope.
2019 Blues, they had 1 homegrown star off the top of my head, which at the time would have been Pietrangelo, who they drafted high. But they had traded for O'Reilly. They had traded for Braden Shen. Binnington had, came out of nowhere, basically. Maybe Parayko, you might have counted in that team as a homegrown sort of star type. Anyway, but the point is I think we don't always acknowledge there's more than one way to put together a team. The drafting and holding on to those guys is one way, but good players, great players get traded in this league. It's just not every day. It doesn't feel like it all the time, but the evidence is staring us in the face. You can trade for great players. You're allowed. You can go out and make ballsy moves, man.
Yep.
And that's maybe the next phase for the Flames is they're going to have to make some really bold decisions. It's not just one thing to say, hey, we're not trading these guys away. It's okay, what are we willing to do? But I guess and remember who finished second in the talks on Eichel? Calgary Flames.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did.
And I know that I went on a rant about finishing second for free agents and stuff. Doesn't matter.
A lot of Flames fans who probably hate that reminder.
No, I know, but on the Jays and stuff, I was ranting against that. So now I'm applauding a team for being in the mix. But but I'm just saying that it doesn't all have to be draft.
No, it doesn't have to all be draft. You just have to, however way you do it, go find yourself a star. Anyway, I didn't even have the
or lots of stars, hopefully.
Lots of stars.
Like, go trade for as many star level talents as you can.
Absolutely, as long as you can get one. I didn't even have the Flames in my notes, but the really cool thing out there. Okay, the Winnipeg Jets. Kevin Cheveldayoff spoke to a friend of the show, Murat Atesh, for The Athletic. He also spoke to the media this week. Spoke to the media this week, not saying that Anyway, Murat Atesh wrote a really great article on Kevin Cheveldayoff and what he was able to say this week. There's interest in Jonathan Toews, Nikolai Ehlers' future, among some of the topics discussed. And also coming out this week, Adam Lowry being out week to week with an upper body injury. A lot to sink into when it comes to the Winnipeg Jets. Where do we start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've maybe slept on what a sort of compelling season this is in Winnipeg, not just because, they're off to a great start. I mean, I know we've hat tipped a little bit Connor Hellebuck and how stellar he's been this year. But, the Jets have Nemesnikov, Ehlers, a couple other players of relative note that are pending UFAs. Obviously they've been, they were one of the top teams last year in the regular season, went out pretty meekly in the first round, but trying to sort of atone for that and take a step. And this sort of window that's definitely open, but how open is it? And how aggressive is management going to be in light of all this, right? And so I think that they do face, a pretty interesting next 4 to 5 weeks as we go into the trade deadline, as they sort of assess their options. The Lowry injury is huge. I mean, they're calling it week to week. I guess if we're going to look for the silver lining here is if he misses 3 weeks, that takes you to the start of Four Nations. So he gets to miss 4.5 while missing the same number of games, if you know what I'm saying. So he gets, there's a world here where he's out for a month, say, but the number of games missed doesn't feel that way because of Four Nations tournament. But, he'd been centering their second line. And the reason that's notable is at one point the thought was the Jets would be going out looking again. This is a bit of a recording from previous seasons, but they were out there looking for a second line center. Then all of a sudden Lowry was bumped up to that position and it was going well. And I think it was enough where management was thinking like, oh, maybe, even though it's a little non-traditional because Lowry is, obviously a more defensive minded player, not known so much for, his ability offensively, and usually out of a second line, you're certainly looking for offense. There was at least a thought for a brief moment there, unfortunately, before he get injured in that game against Utah, that he might have been the internal solution. And what does that allow us to do? And then bang. What's that story? When you make plans, God laughs or something. I mean, you're starting to think one way, and then all of a sudden that's sort of blown up in your face. And so, yeah, I just think the Jets are a team to watch. I think that they will be sneaky aggressive at this deadline, because I think there's a lot of reasons to be. I mean, they don't know, much like the Leafs don't know if Mitch Marner's back. Colorado Avalanche don't know if Mikko Rantanen's back. Nikolai Ehlers is not the same level of talent as those other two. I think he's a step below, but he's a really damn good player. He's having a great year for Winnipeg. They put him on their top power play, and it's taken right off here lately. So, just when you don't know if you might be losing sort of, I think he's a star quality player. I don't know if he's at least if not a full shooting star, he's like one level below that star player. Yeah. And, you only get so many kicks at the can. And so that's kind of my long-winded rant on the Jets, but just let's not sleep on these guys. I do think that, I could see them. They haven't been afraid when they've had the chance, right? Like they've traded a lot of first-round picks at the deadline. They've made bold moves. Like, Winnipeg is not a destination for free agents. The organization understands that. Like that's just a fact. And so I think that they're not afraid to go out and trade for players because that's probably the best way for them to attract players, which is a nice segue to a man you brought up, Jonathan Toews, because the one exception here, and I don't mean just the one exception. Obviously other players have chosen Winnipeg as free agents, but, would probably be certainly the biggest name free agent signing in Jets 2.0 history if they could get Jonathan Toews' contract on a deal there. And I think that's just one that we tuck away. It's still not clear if Toews is going to be able to come back, even make a real pitch at a comeback this season. As a reminder, he would have to sign by March 7th with the team to be eligible to play in the playoffs. And so, that's a tight window when he's still just ramping back up physically and trying to see how his body reacts to everything. But, maybe in the offseason, he could be someone that Winnipeg is knocking on the door at. And I just think would be a pretty cool story. Homegrown guy, he obviously knows Cheveldayoff. Cheveldayoff was in the Blackhawks organization before he took over in Winnipeg. But,
Right.
Winnipeg's also a small town, and Mark Chipman is a prominent citizen of that city, prominent businessman in Winnipeg. Obviously, he and Jonathan Toews know of each other, if not outright know each other. And so if a Toews, I have to say this, if Toews comes back, which I hope he's able to do, I think Winnipeg might be my favorite potential landing spot. What do you feel about it? Just for stories, for vibes, I think it would be storybook in some ways.
Oh yeah. I think him playing in Winnipeg for his hometown, that's a cool story. Even if it's just for the end of this year and maybe it just doesn't work out, but to say that he got to play for his home city, I can appreciate that being a nice story for him and fans getting to see that. Plus, he's on a competitive team. He doesn't have to be the driver. There doesn't have to be that many expectations on him. It's a little bit like found money.
What expectations does he have for himself?
Well, it would be
the one thing I've learned about elite athletes is they don't like this idea that if you've been the number one dog for your whole career, you want to just stare nature and father time in its face and be like, no, I can still do that. But you're right. Let's be realistic. He's probably He's not coming back as a top line center, I don't think.
No, but that if he scores that first goal he scores for the Winnipeg Jets.
Oh man.
And imagine if he gets to score in the playoffs. Man, we talk about that moment for a while in Winnipeg Jets 2.0 history.
If you could, just for fun, what is there anywhere you'd like to, if you could just wave a wand and be like, it would be cool if Jonathan Toews played for blank.
Winnipeg's up there for me.
Would you want to see him back in Chicago?
I don't what's the point of him being back in Chicago?
Teaming up with McDavid in Edmonton or McKinnon in Colorado or Matthews in Toronto. Those are the kind of teams that
Winnipeg's nice. Colorado, I guess that could be fun. Edmonton, they're always loading up on getting guys. To me, that feels a little wrong considering Winnipeg is there. I get Edmonton and Winnipeg are not in the same division, but
imagine he signs in Minnesota. It's sort of kind of a low-key rival of Winnipeg, and they're the Wild are having a good season.
That would be so bad. Plus another division team considering Chicago's there. That would not like that. I like Winnipeg. Colorado, fine again. He doesn't have to be the guy there. Just another added player for insurance. You could basically be a holdover until somehow miraculously Gabriel.
What about Vegas? I already mentioned Vegas on the pod. What happens if
bro, again? Yeah, add more people
Vegas
again.
Or Florida,
Bro, when he gets to Vegas, they're going to give him some kind of adamantium skeleton, the same one that Mark Stone has. What are we doing here? I don't need Vegas to get more. You know what? I don't really care.
I know. I'm just having fun.
Oh, no, I'll say this. I don't, you know what? I said what I said about Vegas, but really, okay. If you're in a position where you're able to do it, I can't even hate on you that hard. It's just I think there's a very obvious, team that Jonathan Toews should go to in the name of the story. And it feels like if he goes anywhere else, it's just sure. All right. You're helping your chances at winning a cup, but really? This team? That's why Chicago doesn't make any sense to me. I get it. Fine. He has the history there. He played for that team. It would just be it'd be a cool way to end his career if it gets to that point or getting more fans in the seats. But Jonathan Toews wants to win and he's been a winner for as long as he's been able to play this sport. I think it'd be cool if he was on a team that was actually trying to go for it as opposed to him just basically going for skates from here to the end of the year in Chicago. I don't need him back in a Chicago uniform. Put him in Winnipeg.
Right. And I'm just trying to bring some positive because the last couple times I've mentioned him on the pod, I've mentioned that it's still not clear if he can actually come back. So I'm trying to put some good energy out there that this comeback's happening, and we're trying to, we're sitting here playing fantasy hockey to figure out where we'd like to fit.
The Chris Johnston Show, a show where you get nothing but positive energy the entire time.
Most of the time, as long as we're not talking baseball.
Time. Yeah, as long as we're I wasn't even going to go there. I wasn't even going to go there. What, you're not happy about Anthony Santander signing with the Toronto Blue Jays? That's a good signing. I mean,
good signing, but it's a little late.
Positivity.
I need to see more.
Positivity.
I need to see more.
Okay. Stick taps. Before we get on out of here. Stick taps. You got a stick tap.
Yeah, I'm going to give my stick tap today to Logan Thompson, who, in addition to being certainly one of the top goaltenders in the NHL this year, would love to see him in Team Canada colors at the Four Nations face-off, but he was passed over and he's done nothing but win pretty much every start since then. He gets a stick tap today for his good humor at the experience he had on Tuesday night in Edmonton, where nachos and cheese were thrown on the ice. I'm sure by now, if you're a hockey fan, you've seen this. But not a plate of nachos and cheese was thrown on the ice. Thompson is yelling at the referee. He's trying to get play stopped just as Corey Perry comes in and scores on him. And I must say, whenever you feel like you've seen everything, something like that happens to remind you you haven't. So good for Thompson for persevering. The Capitals got to win in the game. He was pretty good-hearted about it if you saw his interview afterwards with reporters. And yeah, I mean, he's had a hell of a season, and I could have stick tapped him any week basically and said, look at this guy proving some haters wrong, some doubters wrong. He's a pending UFA, by the way. Not that he's trade bait. Obviously the Capitals are trying to win a cup, but he's in line for a payday after this performance this year for Washington. And so way to not let the nacho ruin your night. Taco Tuesday took on a different vibe in Edmonton.
You could give a cross-check to the fan who threw those nachos. Why are you wasting food and throwing it on the ice like a child?
Yeah, I'm not gonna celebrate that fan, but I will say the one thing we're still missing as of this recording is we got to figure out who did this. Like, we need the local media interview of this person.
Show yourself.
We need a name, and we need a rationale here. Like, maybe it was in protest of the whole McDavid thing. Who knows? Maybe it turns out George Peros loves nachos, and this was some elaborate protest. I mean, right now we don't know. We're only left to guess. And so local Edmonton media, I'm sure you're on the case, but I hope one of you are able to tell us who and why this crime was perpetrated.
Mark Spector, Daniel Nugent-Bowman.
I'm thinking more than Newsies. This is more of like a news story. You know what I mean?
What Edmonton news members do I know? Anyway,
I don't know.
Get on the case.
But someone found out who threw the Eggo waffle on the ice in Toronto 10 or 15 years ago, and like that person's name was like published in the paper. So
I'll send a text to, even though he's not news media, I'll send a text to friend of the show Tony Brar, the Oilers TV host and reporter. I'm sure they'll find out who did this.
Yeah, and if anyone out there knows, get in our DMs. I want info. I want to know why. Honestly,
yes,
I just want to know why this happened, because it's such a strange occurrence.
Yes, and I did joke about giving the cross check. I will rescind a cross check if you reveal yourself to us here at the CJ Show. I will rescind whatever cross check I was going to administer. In all seriousness, I'll give my cross-check to Alex Nedeljkovic for scoring a goalie goal last week. A goal and an assist. First goalie to ever do that. That is super cool. Also scored a goal in the NHL, the AHL, and the ECHL. Pretty freaking awesome for Alex Nedeljkovic. So I'm going to give him my stick tap for this week.
Yeah, he must have been wanting to do that for a while. If you've been scoring at every level, like he's a puck handler.
Absolutely. I love it for him. That's going to do it for today's edition of the CJ Show. Thank you all so much for tapping in. Please leave a like or however you want to positively review us, whether you listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever. Just, spread the good word of the CJ Show. Get your questions in now for the next Ask CJ, which will go down on Monday. And subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long. Enjoy your weekend.
And if you're listening in New Zealand, Thank you. That's just crazy.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.